Now, with the shapes kind of set aside, and now that you are maybe a little more familiar with what shape tools there are and how to utilize them, the next thing we should talk about is what we call arrangement. And so the easiest way to describe arrangement is that if you imagine that everything you draw in Illustrator is drawn on top of everything else. So if I draw a circle right here, and then let me change the color. And then I want to then draw, let's say, another circle. Every time I draw something new, it's going on top of the last time, or whatever I drew behind it. So for Illustrator, there is always this sense of everything is always being layered on top of itself. There are what we call layers over here in this window right on my right. If you do not have this, you can see this by going Window, Layers. There are what we call layers, which actually separate, and you can lock different sections of the artwork, but we'll get more into that at a different time. But just to explain that everything in your file is being drawn on top of each other. And so if you draw something way back here, this shape I drew earlier is going to be behind these two shapes that I just drew. So you need to be aware of the arrangement, because this can mean you can lose pieces of your drawing. You can lose sections on accident. It's very easy. But there's ways to fix this. So you can select your shape. And so I've selected this big star because we're missing a few inside of here. And you can go Arrange, Object, Arrange. And you can see it gives you 4 options. You can bring it all the way to the front. You can send it all the way to the back. So that means it'll be the frontmost or the backmost object. Or you can just bring it forward, or you can step it backwards. So that would be sending it forward or backwards, one piece at a time. So sometimes you want to send it all the way to the back so you know it's that straight at the back, and other times you want to do it more gradually so you can control which sort of like layer it's falling under. There are keyboard shortcuts with this, which I do often use, but for now you can see it just goes Object, Arrange, Send to Back, and now you can see we have our missing star established here. So the other thing is that this is where right-clicking becomes super helpful, in that if you select these objects, which I'm holding Shift and I'm selecting all 3 shapes to select more than one, I can then right-click with my tablet, or you can right-click with your mouse, and you can just go here and also select Arrange and Send to Back. Now, if you utilize both, it does the same thing. It just comes down to your familiarity. For me, it's quicker to utilize the shortcuts and sometimes right-clicking. But until you get more used to that, it is totally fine to just go up here and utilize Object, Arrange, Send to Back, Send to Front, etc. One thing you do want to be cognizant of with your shapes is, as you can see, some of my outline is a little bit shaky. And so this actually comes from, or inconsistent, I should say, this comes from the fact that these shapes were scaled manually. So that is to say, if I take my shape here, and let's say I make everything have up here in the stroke section, I have everything as a 1-point font. You can see everything, or 1-point stroke, excuse me. You can see now that the width of my outline, or my stroke, or the path, is 1 point wide. So within that, if I were to take one of these shapes and bring it over here, and if I wanted to, say, make it the smallest shape now, so I want it to fit right inside of this star, I can select from the corner and hold Shift, and that's going to scale it down all the way down to the correct size. But now we have a problem, because now my stroke is actually 0.132 points, and if I put it, I'm just going to arrange, bring to front. If I put it right here, you can see now the outline looks different. So this is just something you want to be cognizant of if you're ever making changes to your shapes. I do not usually advise you scale shapes utilizing what's called this bounding box, which is just creating a box around the outmost perimeter of the shape. I don't really recommend to do this unless you're doing it just to show a quick example and you're going to be sure you're going to fix the stroke width and everything. But just to be aware of that you can make that change that way, but you just have to make sure you're making sure everything's staying the correct width you want and size. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is alignment. So similarly to, in some respects, to arrangement, alignment is basically just how can we quickly make it so these are lining up in a way that is creating a similar concentric star shape as the arrangement example over here. Now, you can, of course, eyeball it, and that is doable. It's not going to be super consistent, of course, because it's very easy to make a mistake just by eye. However, you can utilize what are called the alignment tools. And so I have my selection tool here, the black arrow. I'm just going to select all of these shapes. Now, if you look at your window up here, you'll see that there's all of these rectangles with lines. These are your alignment tools. And so you'll become most familiar with them as you continue to work in Illustrator, but you can align these shapes in all types of ways. You can align, if I click this one, it's going to align the leftmost point of each star. So the leftmost point of all these stars is now aligned. I can do the rightmost point. I can do the bottommost point. I can do the top, you name it. But for this example, we really just want this to be a concentric shape. And so if I click this button here, which is horizontal align center, you can now see that everything is lined up horizontally. And then if I do it again, where it's vertical align center, now we have our perfect concentric shapes. And so now I know that this is as aligned as it can be, and all of the centers are perfectly aligned at this point.